It was high up. Like, again, it looked like they were stars. And just their pattern, the way they maneuvered was very, very quick. If anyone's ever seen Project Blue Book on History Channel, it's kind of like what orbs look like in the sky, but just way out there. So that's my story. I hope everyone's happy and healthy. Take care.
Thank you, caller. There we go again. 2 stories, submitted practically back to back, from opposite ends of the globe, that both reported seeing something very similar. Not only that, but both submitters were both military-affiliated females. That's a little bit weird, right? To have 2 sets of calls, back to back, that seem to be covering very similar subjects. Well, I find myself saying this a lot tonight, but would you believe me if I told you it got weirder? Of the remaining 8 or so calls, 3 had a strikingly similar tone. So similar, in fact, that I kinda regret ribbing the Hellier gang for making vague connections and blaming synchronicity. So instead of making claims, I'm gonna share these calls with you. And as you listen, keep in mind that these calls came from completely different phone numbers, different area codes, different voices. To put it more simply, I don't believe these coincidences to be a deliberate prank. So enough of my jawing. Here is Dina's entry from the state of Pennsylvania.
Hi, this is Dina from southwestern PA, and I have a story that my parents experienced. My mom is very religious and does not believe in the paranormal, but of course, I love everything about it. So after this happened, she did call me to kind of vent, and she still said she doesn't believe in it, but she cannot explain what happened. So my parents like to exercise after dinner, like around dusk. They usually go walking on the trail or in cemeteries. And there happens to be a cemetery close to their house, and it's just your normal, everyday cemetery, nothing too spooky about it. It's off of a main road, more of a modern cemetery. There is, the older sections, but there's not a lot of trees. There's not a lot of places to hide. It's just pretty much open. So this particular night, or, dusk, it was in the spring of this year. So in southwestern PA, it was kind of cool. It was probably hoodie weather, 60 degrees or so. And so they were driving in the cemetery, trying to find a place to park to walk the cemetery. As they were driving, they noticed a old woman that was walking towards them. And my mom said she looked so out of place. At first, they just figured, it was just another person that was walking the cemetery, But as they got closer, she noticed that her hair was white, short, and very disheveled. She was walking with a limp, very slowly, almost zombie-like. And what really stuck out was what she was wearing. She was wearing a nightgown that was like very strappy, and it was nude. And the one shoulder was hanging off of her shoulder, almost exposing her chest. And so as they got closer, my dad said, "Wow, do you see that lady?" And my mom said, "Yes, I think she needs help. Maybe she was a dementia patient that got lost or something." So they passed her in the car, and my dad pulled over to the side, and they both got out. And as soon as they got out, they went to look for her, and she was gone. They looked around. There was no trees for her to hide behind. They looked behind monuments and, smaller gravestones. Just maybe she fell just because she was walking so awful, and they couldn't find her. They got back in the car and just kept driving around, making circles, making sure that, she didn't somehow go anywhere else. But in that short amount of time, she was gone. And they didn't walk that night. They went home, and my mom called me very kind of shaken up. She said she doesn't have any explanation for it. She doesn't believe in the paranormal, but she doesn't know what else it could have been. So that's my story. I thought it was spooky and great, and just happened to, I'm, quote, non-believer, so to speak. So I love the podcast,
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Dina. Each time I hear this story, I'm reminded of the character Roberta Sparrow from the film Donnie Darko. Just can't shake that image. But now that was a strange experience, but not nearly as strange as having the next 2 calls come shortly after, in succession no less. The first of the 2 was submitted anonymously from the state of New Mexico.
Hey, Derek, I was calling to leave a story for your law enforcement first responders podcast that's coming up, I hope, or maybe I haven't missed it, but I was a sheriff's deputy in rural New Mexico last year, and I remember it was snowing pretty heavily, and I always worked night shift, and it was about probably 2 a.m., and I had heard stories about this one particular highway that we had that went south into the county, and it kind of hugged its way between 2 Native American reservations. Now, the county I worked in, we had 3 different Native American reservations that kind of nestled in the county or bordered the county. But this particular story, I had heard from several other deputies about this particular highway. Well, this particular night I got called that a lady claims that she had hit a woman walking on this road. And I advised dispatch that I would go out there and check it out. And I get out there, and of course I meet with the complainant. She explains to me that she was headed north back into town, and she came around this particular curve, and she saw what appeared to be a young woman wearing all white standing in the road. And before she could hit her brakes, she hit her. Well, I checked her vehicle. There was no damage. I searched the area, couldn't find anybody. I told the lady that I thought maybe she was just tired and hallucinating and to go on into town and finish her business. Now, what struck me kind of odd was the time of morning it was and why the lady was going into town, because nothing was open. So I went 10-8, which is back in service with my dispatch, and I left. About an hour later, maybe a little bit more, dispatch called me again and said that the same lady had called and advised that she had hit a woman wearing all white. So again, I go back out there myself and another deputy to check the area, but this time there's no vehicles, no complainant. We can't find any evidence where an accident had happened. No one had been hit. And the deputy that was working with me that night was also Native American, and he belonged to one of the tribes that was nestled in the county. And he explained to me that this was quite typical of that time of year, because they would get calls about a lady in white, and they would get phantom accident calls to dispatch, and that it had been going on for several years. Well, fast forward to another couple of days, and I'm off, and I get to researching. So I go to the office, and I start pulling up old accident reports, and I start talking to the sheriff and our chief deputy, who had been with the county for altogether probably 30, 40 years apiece. And I find out that the lady in white story actually comes from a car accident that had happened back in the 50s. The lady in white supposedly is a bride-to-be that was en route to her wedding and had an accident head-on at that particular curve where everybody calls and sees her. She was pronounced dead on scene, and every year about the same time, people start calling in saying that they see a lady in white, or that they see a car rolled over in the ditch, or something to that extent. I'm no longer a sheriff's deputy in that county anymore. I've since moved on to a larger department, but I thought you'd like the story. There are several other stories coming from that area of New Mexico. There's a coal mine there that, I knew a lot of the coal miners, and they talked of skinwalkers and stuff like that, but maybe that's a story for another time. But thanks for the podcast. I really enjoy it on these long graveyard shifts, and just keep up the great work.
Thank you, sir. That is a classic story. It really reminds me of the infamous Resurrection Mary outside of Chicago. Yeah, it's strange to have these 2 calls submitted practically at the same time, but it's even more weird that a third story, perhaps a more chilling story than our previous 2, was submitted the very next call after the gentleman's from New Mexico. So to round us out this evening, the following, which was also submitted anonymously, comes to us from the state of North Carolina.
Hey, Derek. I'm going to keep my name to myself, but I can tell you that I'm calling from North Carolina. I love your podcast. I've been enjoying it right from the beginning, and it really makes me look forward to Thursdays. This is an experience that I had about a year ago, and I thought I would call in and see if maybe it's something you can use. I was coming home from the gym. I think it was probably maybe February or March. It was about 9 o'clock at night, and it was cold enough that I put a hoodie on leaving the gym, which is kind of unusual for me because I'm pretty hot-natured. So it was a chilly night. It was misty and raining. I was driving home into my neighborhood, and I turned left to go down my street. My street comes down and forks in a triangle, and in the middle of the triangle there's a little tiny park that's got some azalea bushes, no tall trees, just low bushes, and like a fountain and some benches, and then the streets are in a triangle around it. So I turned left, and when I turned left on the street, I could see somebody walking in the middle of the road on the far end of that park, right on the same road I was on, right in front of me. And it looked to me like, at first, a person wearing a long, like a beige, like trench coat, raincoat. And I even thought to myself, oh, that person looks like a ghost. But then as I got closer to the corner of the park, it'd be the tip of the triangle, there's a stop sign. And when I stopped at the stop sign, what was crossing the road in front of me was a young girl. She looked like a late teenager, early 20s, in a white prom dress. It was a spaghetti strap white dress, and it flared out at the bottom. And she was barefoot, bare-legged, bare-armed in the cold. And she was talking on an old flip phone, like the earliest, if you imagine, and probably a large portion of the listening audience is not going to know what I'm talking about, but the original flip phone that looked like a giant brick with a little piece that flipped out the bottom for you to talk into and an antenna. And it was so unusual looking to me that at first I thought, is she talking on a cordless house phone in the middle of the street? She had it up to her ear, and I could see it. And I could see, once I realized what it was, it kind of, the way that she was dressed and the fact that she had that in her hand, I thought, oh, that's not normal. So I looked a little closer at her, and she looked really 90s in the way that she was dressed. She had one of the chokers around her neck, and her hair was put up, and it was back in the little twist with the little clips, the tiny little clips that we wore back then. And she's talking on this phone. She's barefoot, and her legs, like around her ankles, looked really bruised. I'm stopped at the stop sign, and I'm watching her cross the road in front of me, and I'm just kind of startled because it occurred to me, oh my God, this might actually be a ghost, because none of this is normal. She didn't look wet, even though it was raining. She did not look at me, even though I was, stopped right there in front of her with my headlights on. She kept straight ahead. I could see her mouth moving. She was talking on the phone. And it was almost the way that she moved, almost like she was gliding more than she was walking. It was the strangest thing. And, I kind of felt like I was holding my breath almost. And she passed right in front of me, and she passed to the right of me towards the park. And it was like I kind of unfroze, and I thought, if this is a girl with very little clothes on out in the rain in the middle of the night, barefoot on the phone, regardless of how weird the phone might look, she might need help. So I rolled the passenger side window down, and I leaned over to ask her, hey, are you okay? Do you need help? And she was just gone. I circled the park, and she was nowhere. The only way that she could have gotten out of my sight that fast is if she had run flat out to the other side of the park, to the other side of the street where there are some houses. She would have had to have been moving insanely fast to have done that, because all of this happened really fast. And there's really no place in the park. The park is well lit. There's really no place that a person in a white dress could have hidden. Even if she was laying flat on the ground, she still would have been visible. So I circled the park. I didn't see her. She, as far as I could see, completely disappeared. The whole situation felt really weird and almost a little unreal at the time that it was happening. And it's not my first paranormal experience, and probably won't be the last, I guess. But it was odd, and it was completely unexpected. I had never heard any. I've lived in that neighborhood for going on 10 years now. I had never heard of any indication of any haunting. The neighborhood was created in the 50s. Most of the houses date back to the early 50s. I know that probably around the time period that this girl was dressed, from what I've heard and been able to find out, it was not a good neighborhood, and there was a lot of drug activity, and a lot of the houses along that stretch of the street were rentals, and was a lot of crime associated with the neighborhood at that point. I did ask around to some older people that have lived in the neighborhood a long time, and they didn't have any information. They had never seen or heard. I could not find any record of any murders or any weird deaths. And she definitely, the bruises around the ankles, honestly, in hindsight, looked to me like somebody that had been restrained. I have no explanation for it. It's just one of those weird things that happens that makes you shake your head and I guess realize that the world is a lot bigger and more interesting than maybe we're led to think that it is sometimes. Anyway, thanks for all your hard work on the podcast, and keep it up, and hopefully this is something that you can use. Have a good day. Bye.
And a big thanks to you as well, caller. So there you have it. I'm not a huge coincidence guy. I notice them, sure, and I even point them out as much as the next guy, but I'm not in the habit of looking too far into them. But this series of events seems different. It feels a little too on the nose. It's a good thing I don't quickly jump to conclusions. Otherwise, a coincidence like this could send me down all sorts of rabbit holes. But just in case, if for some reason this is my final transmission, it was likely the Men in Black. Or I suppose you could blame our friends, the Mirrored Man. Things are just getting a little too weird lately. Or I might just be making something out of nothing. And that's going to do it for this episode. Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Additional support is provided by Sarah Carter Hayes and Addie Lloyd. All audio used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. And that brilliant score you hear, that's Co.ag music. Thank you so much for listening. Please stay safe. And until next week. It's weird, it just dawned on me that our first two calls took place in Massachusetts. And get this, the famous shark attack in Matawan Creek took place in 1916, 100 years to the year before Devon's experience. That's quite the coinkydink. Of course, tonight's bonus entry had to have a small connection as well. It too involves the military. Now this call was randomly selected. I promise there was no funny business. The following was submitted anonymously from parts unknown.
Hi, love the podcast. I've been listening to it for a while now, and this is in regards to your military episode that you're looking to put together, or military experiences. So, served in the Army, and I was in Iraq from 2009 to 2010. I served with a good group of guys. My set, I was set 2-2, second set, second platoon. We did convoy security in Iraq. We've seen some weird stuff in Iraq, and this one occurrence really stood out for me over the years. And at the time, I wasn't a big crypto kind of guy. I developed that interest later in life. But various mediums that I listen to and podcasts, I've heard about these cryptids. It really brings back in my mind this occurrence. So it didn't directly happen to me, but in our convoy, we have about 6 fire teams, which is 3 men, and a gun truck, spaced out between various supply trucks and stuff like that we escort around the country. So I believe on this certain convoy that I'm getting to, we're heading out to FOB Echo, Forward Operating Base Echo, which is a pretty remote location out western Iraq, kind of southwestern Iraq. So I remember, we're doing the convoy and we're coming up on this turn, a pretty sharp right turn. And, it takes a convoy some time to maneuver this thing. We're just kind of trucking along, and our convoy commander, who is in a 1151 Humvee in the center of the convoy, all of a sudden he gets on the air and he's like, "Did anybody else see that?" And we're kind of like, what do you mean? What'd you see? Doesn't really explain. It's just like, just kind of blows it off. Like, oh, never mind. So we get to FOB Echo, we get settled in to our billeting and stuff, and so we kind of ask him. It's him, Staff Sergeant Chitka, and Private Wagner, and I can't remember who else was in the truck. But we can tell that, they had seen something, or that something was bothering them. Trust me, there's plenty of grab-assing and horsing around the younger guys and the privates and stuff in the military, but you could tell that something was definitely weighing on their mind. So we finally got them to tell us that they had seen a dog, I guess. So when we're making the turn, on the adjacent corner of that turn, there was a dog. But I guess that when their headlights kind of made full view of this dog, the dog turned and looked at them, and it had a full, gaunt, very defined human face. Now, they told us the story, and, we didn't ridicule them or be like, "Oh, you guys are crazy." I mean, in the environment that we're in and some of the experiences that we've had, we didn't just take them at face value. I mean, they saw something, and they're telling us they saw this dog with a full-on human face, like a gaunt, very defined human face. Not a deformed dog or something that looked weird, like something that looked back at them with sentience and a human face. So I remember at the time, I just kind of took it as, I don't know. I didn't really think much of it. It's whatever. They told us a story. They saw something. Anyway, I just wanted to share that story. It crosses my mind often. And, I was wondering if maybe you or anybody else has any more information about this type of cryptid or what they are, or I guess some information about it, because when I try to Google it or I've tried to research it, I just get results with, abnormalities and dogs and various things that happen to have kind of a human looking face, but nothing that actually explains what that might be. So like I said, these men are hardened combatants. They have seen some things in their life. We've experienced many things over there. And even with all the grab-assing and playing around and horsing around, that they're pretty no-nonsense type of guys. So that they were pretty disturbed by what they saw. And I just wanted to share that story with you, and hopefully you can use it on the air. I look forward to every episode. All right, thank you.
Thank you, caller, for sharing that story. I gotta admit, I'm at a loss for this one. But I did do a little poking around, and I found that the Middle East is crawling with legends about dog-like gods. Typically, they're jackals or something along those lines, but it's still a canine species. Outside of that, I pretty much came up dry. So perhaps someone out there listening has a little insight and wouldn't mind reaching out. Thank you again, caller, for sharing that call. And thank you for sticking around to the end of the program. Have a good night.
Hello and welcome. The following are stories from previous videos that I've collected over a period of time, and think are my best stories I've narrated so far. But I have redone a few of my older stories as well. I will leave a timestamp to each story just in case you want to skip it if you heard it way too many times. So enjoy, turn the lights off, hide under your sheets, and remember, it's always scarier when you're alone. Last night, a friend rushed me out of the house to catch the opening act at a local bar's music night. After a few drinks, I realized my phone wasn't in my pocket. I checked the table we were sitting at, the bars, the bathrooms, and after no luck, I used my friend's phone to call mine. After 2 rings, someone answered, gave a low raspy giggle, and hung up. They didn't answer after that. I eventually gave it up as a lost cause and headed home. I found my phone laying on the nightstand right where I left it. This happened a week ago, up until a few days ago. I went to a small local gym in my now previous town called Black Bear Fitness. One day I had this misfortune of running into a skinny, awkward-looking kid, probably 18 years old. He didn't look like he belonged in a gym. I had my earbuds in and I was doing my sets when I heard him say something to me. It was muffled by the music. I was already annoyed with this kid, given that he was breaking an unwritten rule at the gym. Don't talk to people when they're doing their sets. I took my time finishing my sets, then took an earbud out and asked him if he needed something. Then he started acting like I looked familiar. Right away I knew this kid was just trying something to be friends with me. I assured him that I didn't know him, but he wouldn't stop talking to me. I didn't listen to most of the conversation, but then he asked for my Snapchat and I gave it to him and urged him to leave me alone. Finally he got the message, but not without saying bye like 3 times. That night I got a snap on my phone from Sean. I immediately saw the snap while wondering why this kid would snap me. I opened the snap and the kid was in a creepy weird pose with his face too close to the camera with a smile on his face. The text of the image said "hey" with 2 Y's. I muttered, what the hell? He knew I was a guy, which made this even more weird. My thought process was I had enough of this and I'm going to remove him and make it clear that I don't want to talk to him again if I see him at the gym. So I removed him minutes after he sent the snap. Not even a minute later, another message appeared on my phone, Snapchat from Sean. I waited a few minutes before opening the snap. This one was even creepier. He was now sitting up on his bed and the text over the image said, "Why did you remove me?" Now I went as far as to block him, which meant he couldn't snap me. I put my phone down and felt relieved. A few minutes later my phone goes off saying Sean has added you as a friend, then Snapchat from Sean. I opened the snap and felt my heart drop. It was a picture of my front yard, and the text over this image said, "Answer me." The first thing I could think of was how could this guy find my address? Then I remember Snapchat has that feature where your friends can see where you live. Somehow I had the guts to open the window to peer outside. There was nothing out there though. I shut the window and started considering phoning the police. Then there was a sound of taps on the window. I took a deep breath before opening the window and pulling the kid in through the room by his neck. I punched him in the face a few times before he was out cold. I phoned the police. By the time the police arrived, he was awake, cursing me out and telling me he would be back to kill me. The police heard it all and I didn't even have to make a case. The kid was an idiot. Luckily the timing worked out because I moved a couple days ago. The only thing that worries me is when someone adds me on the app, I'll never know if it's secretly that Sean kid again. It was 3 in the morning, and I was on my way to my job at my local McDonald's to open up with one of my favorite managers there with me. She told me to text her when I got there so that she could let me inside. Once I pulled in, I noticed a man standing outside of his car in the farthest corner of the parking lot. He was shooting me this sort of menacing stare. Let me point out that it's completely pouring outside. I was really confused as to why this guy wasn't just sitting in his car. I then parked and texted my manager to let me inside. Seconds later, I noticed her at the door, opening it for me. Upon walking up to her, I say my usual good morning. I was stopped mid-sentence by her rushing me inside and saying, "Did you see that guy outside?" I told her yes, and she proceeded to help me refill sauces, napkins, and things like that. My manager then told me that she was going to check the security tapes just to make sure that everything during the period that the restaurant was closed was okay. Minutes later, my manager called me into her office. For whatever reason, she told me to take a look at the screen. It showed the same man outside. The time was 12:47. She then fast-forwarded the tape to reveal that the man had been standing there outside the entire time up until now. At this point, it's about 3:50 a.m. I ran to the lobby and noticed he was still standing over by his car. I figured, or was hoping, that he was just on something and was waiting for us to open, so maybe he could get breakfast. I resumed filling sauces again and making sure everything was in working order until I was abruptly interrupted by banging at the front door. I walked over and noticed a figure outside the front door. It was the man. I yelled at him that we were closed and that he would have to come back later, but that didn't seem to faze him, as he continued to bang on the door. I walked away thinking he was just being an asshole when suddenly I heard a loud crash. I ran to the lobby to see the glass door was broken and the man began stepping inside. I yelled for my manager and told her that we needed to leave through the back door. And we did just that. We booked it out to our cars and both called the police. They arrived in about 15 minutes. I came outside the restaurant with a dirty-looking man in cuffs. This said he was hiding in the back janitor's closet with a large knife in his hand. So that's my story, and also the reason I'm never working early mornings again. The following is a story about a Reddit user's dad's experience while hiking in the Appalachian Trails. My dad was a journalist for most of his life and is now an author. This is one of his stories from hiking the Appalachian Trails. My dad hiked the trail mostly by himself, but occasionally would run into other hikers and spend a few days hiking and camping with them. He said it was always a pleasant experience and he would make a lot of really good friends. He met Jeff and Molly, a really nice couple, and began hiking with them for a couple of days. After camping with them and becoming fairly good friends, they went their separate ways as my dad pulled out ahead of them. He was about 2 days further down the trail than them, and he stopped out of town to get real food and relax. That's when he found out that Jeff and Molly had been murdered in their sleep by a stranger on the trail. Molly had been raped and stabbed repeatedly throughout the process, and Jeff had been shot. I think it's absolutely terrifying that my dad had just camped with them. Being a single mother and having to work 2 jobs, I am always have to hire a babysitter to watch my 3-year-old son. I have a long drive from my second job, and on a few occasions, I've almost fallen asleep behind the wheel from exhaustion. There was one night that I felt myself starting to doze off, so I tried pinching myself and shaking my head and doing anything to wake myself up. There were no lights at all on this highway, which made it even worse. And then I heard giggling coming from behind me. I looked in the mirror and saw my 3-year-old son looking at me in the back seat. I slam on the brakes and look at the back seat to find it empty. 10 seconds later, I got a phone call from the sitter telling me that he had just fallen down the stairs and broken his ankle. I was fully awake after that and sped home. To this day, I still believe that mothers have some kind of sixth sense when it comes to their children. This happened to me a couple years ago and it still gives me paranoia. I live alone in my apartment with my dog. He's a golden retriever named Billy, and an impressive appetite even for a dog. The incident happened on a Friday night. I was sitting on my couch with my dog eating dinner and watching a movie on TV, once in a while handing Billy a piece of my food. It was getting late, so I decided to go to bed after taking a quick shower. I went to the bathroom without finishing my dinner. I must admit, I'm kind of a messy head, and a full plate left over unfinished on the table didn't bother me. After the shower, I got into bed. I whistled for my dog, as he usually likes to spend the night at the foot of my bed. He didn't come, so I just went to sleep. He probably fell asleep on the couch or something. The next morning I woke up super late, and this is where it becomes strange and creepy. The leftovers on the plate from the previous night were gone. It didn't really bother me. It was probably Billy who ate it. I went into the living room to find him to take him on a walk, but he wasn't there. I called his name, but he didn't seem to be anywhere in the apartment. No, I was seriously worried. I really am fond of my dog, and didn't really like it when he wasn't around. I spent most of the afternoon searching for him around the neighborhood, but I couldn't find him. I even called the police, telling them the situation, but they told me they couldn't do anything about it. Sad and depressed, I went back to my home, but when I got back, I found something that sends chills down my spine. It was a note on my nightstand that I hadn't noticed from earlier. There were 7 words on that note that I will never forget. Thanks for dinner. I like your dog. I've never been more afraid in my entire life. The person who wrote the note had been in my apartment during the evening and had eaten my leftovers from my dinner. How long had they been hiding there? And were they still around? I ran out of my apartment and called the police again. I told them that someone had been in my apartment, and I feared that they might have taken my dog. They came to investigate, but they didn't find anything. After the incident, I hung up posters of Billy everywhere in the neighborhood, hoping that someone had seen him, but I never saw him again. I haven't had another dog since then. Shortly after high school, some friends and I went camping one weekend. We drove to a national park which had a campground, but we decided to go outside the grounds so we didn't have to worry about making too much noise or disturbing other campers. We set up everything in a nice clearing next to a bushy slope. Get a fire going, the moon opens up, and we crack open some beers. So far, so good. Around 10 p.m., we started hearing the noise of people walking down the hill through the bushes towards our camp. This puts us on guard, but we weren't too concerned about it. It's a popular park, and we figured it's just some campers making the most of the long weekend. We all keep our eyes strained on the sound, and soon enough, the people arrive at the bottom of our slope. But they don't cross the tree line into the clearing. They just stop in a huddle, and it's hard to make out details, but it looks like there's 6 figures. Somewhat oddly, all of them are dressed in white, and the moonlight reflecting off the garments gives them an eerie glow. I can sense my friends are starting to feel as nervous as I, and my friend D tries to escape the tension and calls out to the group in a friendly way. "Hey, how's it going?" They don't reply. D keeps calling out to them with stuff like, "Just enjoying some beers here. It's a beautiful night. What you up to?" They don't reply. Eventually, one of the figures emerges from the tree line and walks towards us. He stops just beyond the light of our fire and stands there staring down at us. D babbles at him for a few seconds with some nervous banter, but the man cuts D off in mid-sentence. "How long will you be here for?" he asks, really low and slow, so we can't make out his accent or tone, but he certainly doesn't sound friendly. We were originally going to camp there for 2 nights, but I have a bad feeling for obvious reasons, and I blurt out, "Oh, we're not hanging around. We leave first thing tomorrow morning." My friends murmur in agreement, and the guy says nothing. He just stands there staring at us, and I notice his clothes in more detail now. As mentioned, they're all white, and the top was kind of a loose baseball jersey, only made of a thin cottonish material. This is odd, because that night is fairly cool. Cool enough that I can see the man's breath and he should be freezing. But whatever, he just keeps staring, and I can hear the others from his group shuffling in their spot behind the tree line. Finally, the man speaks again.
You're leaving tomorrow morning.
It's not a question. We all agree, panicking now. Yes, we're leaving tomorrow. Apparently satisfied, the man walks back to his group. They all start making their way back up the slope. My friends and I say very little until we can't hear the group anymore. And even when they're totally out of earshot, we speak in nervous whispers. What the fuck was that? Man, some people are weird. We tried to chill out, get some music going, crack open some more beers, but we're shaken up now, and what's more, we can feel like we're being watched. We think the group is parked up somewhere up on the slope, scoping us out. So much for a fun night out drinking and bullshitting. We were too wound up and end up crawling into the tents, where we spend the night, bunkered down like mice hiding from a cat. We get up early and leave immediately. The whole time we're tracking back to the park, we feel like we're being trailed. The sensation of being watched never leaves us. Once we're in the car and loaded up, we relax. Man, that was some freaky shit last night. We go over all of it, excited in a weird way, considering all the different theories. Meth heads, occult, Satanists. But would Satanists wear all white? It's almost amusing now that we're out of danger. We stop at the town nearest to the park. It's a real bumfuck nowhere kind of place. Just the petrol station, a dingy looking pub, a closed down bank, and other retail decay. We pull into the petrol station for snacks, and the guy manning the counter looks like a bit of a hard ass. But we chat in a bit, and he's friendly enough. We tell him about running into some weird people last night in the park, and he's very interested in that. He makes us explain in detail what happened. After he's heard our story, I expect him to laugh it off.
Oh, they were just some religious weirdos that camp out there sometime.
He doesn't laugh. He gets all quiet and narrows his eyes.
You guys were really lucky last night.
He says. Right there was the scariest part because he's a no bullshit cowboy type, and I can tell he's being deadly serious. We pay for our snacks and drive back to the city, never to return. I've told this story a few times and others often come up with kooky explanations. Like those weird people were ghosts or alien hybrids or aboriginal spirits or something. The white clothes seemed to trip people out. It wasn't that though. These were real flesh and blood people we saw. There was nothing paranormal about it. I once came across a similar story on a forum. It happened in the USA, but it was almost the exactly same experience. Me and a buddy of mine went camping together in Vermont, literally deep in the woods. We went hiking during the day, and come nightfall we got blackout drunk around a bonfire. Come day 2, we began to hear strange noises from outside our tent, like a rustling noise. Day 3, the noises sounded closer. So my buddy shot his rifle into the darkness of the forest. We heard a loud voice say, It echoed through the woods. Us not knowing what to do, we began sprinting blindly into the woods. Daybreak came, and we went back to grab our things, still hesitant. Our camping gear was trampled, and our bags were gone. We didn't phone the police. I feel stupid for not. But I never go camping deep in the woods again. And I can assure you that's a fact. I used to live way out in the country, not desolate, but few neighbors had lots of land. It was summertime, so for me that meant late nights on the internet. Our only computer was in the guest bedroom on the opposite side of the house from my room. The house is pretty wide, so I had to pass through 3 different rooms if I wanted to use the internet. So it was about 2 a.m.-ish, and I'm on the internet talking with some friends. Anyway, some situation comes up where I need to get something from my room. So I exit the guest bedroom I walk through the laundry room, tiptoe quietly through the kitchen, past my parents' room because the floor creaks, and enter the living room. I'm 6 feet away from my bedroom when I hear this blood-curdling shriek. My eyes almost tearing up from even thinking about it. Coming right beside my ear, the side that the fucking dining room table is currently on, as there is no space for anyone to stand there and scream in my fucking ear. I sprinted to my room, slammed the door right behind me. I grabbed whatever I